Middle-earth is more than just land. It is the memory of ancient heroes and the terrors that awoke with the first light of dawn today. An old wizard will tell you yet another legend, so you may understand that even the darkest times can give birth to light long before the rising of the sun in the twilight of the elder days. When stars alone watched over the sleeping world, there came into being the first of the dwarves' name was Durin, and he would come to be known through the long ages as Durin. The deathless no tale of stone or song of war or wonder may be told of the dwarfs without his name echoing through its heart. He was not born as elves or men are born, nor did he awake beside kin or kind. He rose alone beneath the cold stars in the deep hush of night. Atop the peak of Mount Gundabad far in the north, Durin opened his eyes to the glittering stars above, strange and eternal, and the quiet crunch of snow beneath his feet. No voice called him, and no hand guided him, but a deep and secret will stirred in his heart the secret fire of Al the smith, the valor who had shaped him, though Al had been forbidden to create life of his own. LOTR had granted the dwarves being, seeing the love their maker had poured into them, but they were to sleep until after the awakening of elves, and so all others still slumbered beneath the earth. Only Durin was awake. He did not speak then, nor did he shout his name to the winds. He was solemn, with eyes deep and dark like polished obsidian filled with wisdom that had no teacher. He was ancient even at his birth, and though the stars were young, he seemed older still. Alone he stood cloaked in silence, as snowflakes drifted like falling starlight about his broad shoulders, and long cold duck beard Durin looked to the mountains that cradled the world, and saw them waiting vast and proud, yet empty of voices. He felt a calling, as if something slumbered deep within the stone, something waiting to be found. So he began to walk southward. He journeyed his sturdy feet, treading snow and soil over crags, and across high ridges he walked, not to escape solitude, but to fulfill a longing deep within him, a yearning for roots, for hearth, for the sound of hammers, and the ring of songs in deep halls through the silent vales of the north. He wandered where ancient trees whispered secrets in the starlight, and beasts of the elder world slunk through the shadows, watching him with weary eyes. There were no paths, no maps, and no names for the places he passed. Durin named them in his heart, and the land remembered where he drank from a spring. It flowed clearer ever after where he rested beneath a crag. The stone stood firm through storm and time. At length, after many long leagues and many star-filled nights, he came upon a valley shrouded in mist. Nestled beneath the peaks of the misty mountains, in its heart lay a lake still as glass, untouched by wind. The stars above shone in its surface as if the heavens themselves had descended to rest there. Durin knelt by the lake's edge, gazing into the water, and there he beheld a marvel. In the mirror of that lake he saw a reflection, not just of himself, but of his future. A crown of 7 stars shimmered above his brow, though no such thing adorned him. In truth, his face, solemn and noble, bore the strength of mountain stone and the wisdom of the deep earth, and in his eyes burned a light unquenchable, a light of purpose, of destiny. Durin stood, and the wind stirred as though it too had seen the vision. This shall be my home, he said at last, his voice low and sure. Here shall my people dwell, and here shall we carve a kingdom out of the roots of the world. So he named the lake Keledaram, the mirror, and the mountains around it he called Berizinbur, Zarakajul, and Bundesr, the red horn, the silverine, and the cloudy head. Beneath these peaks he would delve, beneath these peaks would rise a realm, not of wood or thatch, but of stone Kazadam the mansion of the dwarfs, but even as he stood in wonder the deep stones stirred, for beneath the mountains far below the lake something ancient dwelt, a fire spirit wreathed in shadow and flame had crept into the depths long ago, fleeing the breaking of Thanaradrim and the wrath of the Valor. It was a Balrog, demon of old servant of Morgoth, lying hidden in silence. It felt Duran's steps, it felt the will of the dwarves awakening, and it watched unknowing Duran began to work with stone axes and fire-hardened tools. He carved the first halls near the Miramir. The walls rang with the first hammer blows of dwarf folk, as others of his kind, stirred by the same secret call, began to awaken in distant mountains and found their way to him one by one. They came drawn as ironies to a lodestone. They were the long beards Durin's folk, the eldest and most noble of the dwarf clans. Together they began the shaping of the greatest dwarf hold the world would ever know. Yet the shadow and the deeps remained, and the mountain remembered, though it made no move. It waited patient as stone, for the age to turn. Duran did not yet know the danger to him. The mountain offered promise, not peril. He sang as he built low and sorest, and the very rocks seemed to answer. He taught his folk the ways of stone and metal, and they in turn shaped halls of grandeur wide and strong, with high-vaulted ceilings and pillars like trunks of stone trees. But the deeper they delved, the nearer they came to that which slumbered. And so the story begins not with battle or doom, but with wonder and hope, with the first hammer stroke echoing in darkness, and a vision of stars reflected in still water. Durin, the first, the deathless, had begun a legacy that would outlive ages, a tale carved in stone and shadow. But even the longest reign begins with a single step, and every fire, even in the heart of the mountain, can stir beneath the stars. In the stillness of the Miramir, Durin and his folk began their work. In earnest the air was crisp and sharp in the high valleys, but within the mountain it was cool and steady, and the stone was strong and good. They dug halls of majesty just behind the veil of the waterfall, where the waters of Celebial tumbled down in silver streams. Their fires glowed in the dark, and the songs of their hammers rang out like bells of brass, echoing through caverns. Newly born Kazadam was not yet vast, but it was growing room by room, hall by hall, and with each blow of chisel and pick the dwarves learned more. The bones of the world they discovered, rich veins of copper, of tin, of iron, enough to craft tools and weapons and great machines of stone and gear. But it was the silver they prized above all, the wondrous mithril found only in the deeps of the mountain. The elves would later call it true silver or Moria silver, but to the dwarfs it was mithril, light and strong beyond compare, a treasure of the very earth's heart. Though rare it gleamed even in shadow, and in it Duran saw the hope of his people, something enduring, something bright that no darkness could dull. Still Durin was wise and cautious. He forbade his folk from digging too greedily or too deep, for though the stones sang sweetly in the shallows, the deep ways whispered of other things, echoes that were not their own, distant rumbles like a beast turning in uneasy sleep. And so they carved outward more than downward, shaping mighty halls and pillared courts beneath the mountains, seeking light and harmony, not just wealth. Their kingdom grew, and with it their fame. Elves from far off Lenin and Ion heard of Duran and his halls, and came seeking trade. Though there was little love between dwarves and elves in those early days, there was respect. The elves admired the dwarves' unmatched skill with stone and fire. The dwarves in turn marveled at the elves' songs and their lore of the stars. In time friendship blossomed slowly like moss upon stone. Durin welcomed the elves who came in peace, offering them crafted wonders blades that never dulled goblets etched with flame and hinges that sang when opened, and in return the elves gifted him with things no hammer could make, seeds of rare trees, woven tapestries, and secrets of the moon and the sun which the dwarves had not seen rise in those days. The mountains rang with laughter and song. The children of old danced in their forges, crafting tools of brilliance, armor etched with runes of protection, and lamps that burned without fire. And Durin was the heart of it all, tall among dwarves. He was his beard silver, even in youth his eyes deep, and shining like starlight on obsidian. No sickness touched him, no weariness dulled his hand. His memory was perfect, and his voice carried like the wind in caverns vast and hollow to his people. He was more than king, he was father, and guide a rock amid the turning of the world. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, his words stayed like carvings in stone. But though Khazad shone bright, and its people prospered, there were stirrings in the east, dark clouds gathering in the unseen places of the world, from Angban's ruin, and the tomb of Morgoth. Wicked creatures had fled and spread, whispering secrets and fears into the hearts of men. The world was shifting slowly and silently, and beneath the roots of the mountain the Balrog stirred. It did not yet rise, for it was cunning, and it sensed the strength of Durin, but it began to wake its slumber, troubled by the light and music above. It felt the touch of Mithil being drawn from the earth, felt the pain of fireless forges, blazing far above the tremors of chisel and hammer ran through the bedrock, and the demon in the deeps began to dream dreams of flame, of torment, of the return of the dark power. Durin, though mighty, could not yet see the shape of the shadow, but he felt unease grow like frost upon the stone. He spoke to his folk, less of delving and more of dwelling, reminding them that a mountain is a home, not a prize. He told them the mountain has memory, that it may one day remember how deeply it was wounded to soothe their spirits, and his own he commissioned the hall of songs, a vast chamber near the lake, its ceiling carved with constellations, its walls inlaid with mythal runes. There they sang the histories of their people, of Owl's gift, of the wandering years of the first coming to the Merm. They sang of stars and stone, of fire and forge, of birth and becoming, and the mountain listened. Then came a night of wonder. Durin climbed once more to the lake beneath the stars alone, as he had come in the beginning. He stood by the still waters of Kelzurum. The night was bright, the stars like scattered gems on velvet, and the mountain stood silent all around. As he gazed once more into the water, the vision returned. There again was the crown of stars above his brow, clearer now than ever, and he saw in the lake not only himself, but a host behind him, a line of dwarves stretching into the midst of time, each bearing his face, each bearing his name. During the deathless, during the first, during the immortal, he saw halls wider than the sky, bridges of stone that spanned abysses and fires that never dimmed. He saw greatness, and he saw sorrow. He saw glory carved in mithril and grief etched in flame. He saw a future he could not stop, and a name that would echo long after his bones turned to dust. Yet he did not flinch. He whispered a vow into the waters of vow, to stand, to build, and to endure. The mountain heard, but in the dark far below something else heard as well, and for the first time in many long years the Balrog opened its eyes. The winter that followed was long, and sharp snow wreathed the upper peaks of the misty mountains, and the valleys below lay in deep silence. Yet within the halls of Khazad the forges burned warm, and the stone-wrought chambers rang with life. The long beards had grown in number, and new halls were delved in all directions. Columns rose like trees of stone, shaped with cunning and adorned with runes that glowed faintly in the forge light. Durin walked often among his people, speaking little, but observing all. His presence stirred the hearts of even the youngest of his folk. Though many winters had passed since his awakening, his form was unchanged. His beard had grown long and silver, but his limbs were strong and his eyes bright. Some whispered that time could not touch him, that he bore the blessing of Aule still upon his brow. In those days the dwarves shaped wonders. They crafted gates of iron that opened without touch, stairs that twisted like coils of smoke, and lamps filled with a cold white light that needed no fire. They delved deeper, carefully, and found more of the silver veins that gleamed in darkness. Mythal rare and prized above all was wrought into mail and memory. It did not dull nor break, and it shone like moonlight on snow. The elves of Eridian, led by Kelbimber, came in those days to the gates of Khazadam, bearing gifts and greetings. They walked the great bridge over the deep ravine and marveled at the stonework of the dwarves. In return, they brought secrets of craft and song, and a rare friendship was kindled between the children of Au and the folk of the elder. Durin welcomed the elves with a measured grace. He knew the heart of his people was not easily given, but he also saw wisdom in alliance. Beside him stood Nasix, his most skilled artisan, and close companion. Together with the guidance of Kelbimber, they began work on the western gate of Khazadam, a door of such art and beauty that few could rival it. Upon it they set the emblems of their peoples, entwined the crown and hammer of the dwarves, and the star of the house of Fëanor. The gate faced westward toward Erin, and it opened not with lock or key, but with a word of friendship known only to those who walked in peace. Durin named it Durin's door, and he smiled when it was complete, though the smile was rare and fleeting, yet beneath the stone, and song deeper than any hall or mine. The darkness watched. The Balrog spirit of fire and shadow lay coiled in the deepest chasm of the world. It had slept through centuries of silence, but now it stirred the forging of mithril, the singing of voices in the deep, and the growing power of the dwarves stirred old memories of whips of flame, of battle under blackened skies, of the wrath of the valor, and the fall of great towers in the north. It did not rise, not yet, but it listened to Durin, though he knew nothing of its form or name, began to feel its presence. At first it came in dreams, a breath of heat where no fire burned, a shadow where no light had failed. Then in waking there were whispers, cracks in walls that mended too quickly, tremors in stone where none should be. The mountain, once a fortress of silence, had begun to murmur. He did not speak of it to the elves, nor even to Nasix, but he ordered that no shaft be dug beyond a certain depth. He set guards in the deepest forges and kept vigil himself in the lower halls. One night, deep beneath the foundations of stone, Durin stood alone in a great cavern newly delved. The air there was still and cold, but there was a scent to it, faint but unmistakable, a trace of ash. He raised a lamp, but the wall swallowed its light. A sound came then, faint as breath, a distant sigh that stirred the dust. Who walks there? He called, his voice firm and unyielding. No answer came, only silence deeper than before. Durin turned and walked back toward the lit passageways, but from that night onward he knew the mountain was not empty. Something old, something terrible lay in the roots of the world. Still the work continued. The halls of Khazadam stretched wide, and far in the east a river flowed beneath the mountain, and they built bridges over black chasms and carved walkways through glittering stone. The wealth of the dwarves grew and their law increased. And yet Durin's heart grew heavy. He was not afraid, but he felt the weight of years, not his own, the pull of time, yet to come, and the shadow that lay coiled beneath the world like a wound unhealed. Often he would walk alone, pausing by the mirror, to look once more upon the reflection of the stars. Always they were there, burning bright above his head, a silent crown upon his brow. One night, as the stars turned above the peaks and the wind whispered over the lake, Durin spoke aloud. "This mountain is strong, and we are strong," he said. "But even the strongest stone may crack, and even the deepest root may be burned. I will build, and I will guard. And when the time comes, let them say, 'We stood behind him, the wind stir the waters.' And somewhere far beneath his feet the fire began to breathe. Many years passed. Though time in the deeps moved slow like the drift of stone, the halls of Khazadam grew ever more splendid. Arches rose like the ribs of the mountains themselves. Great pillars were carved in likenesses of the fathers of the dwarves, and lamps of mithril and crystal bathed the halls in a soft, steady light. In the eastern reaches the Longbeards had begun to explore the upper slopes of Kelbdil and Caradras, seeking passage into the world beyond through narrow stairways and tunnels of stone they built, away a dim and winding road that led from the upper halls to a narrow cliff in the mountains. And so they opened the east gate of Khazad-dûm, and for the first time sunlight poured into their realm. It was a strange thing to the dwarves, for though they were not harmed by the sun, as some believe, they preferred the steady dimness of torch and forge light. Still some among them looked with wonder upon the rolling hills and green forests. Beyond they saw the lands that would one day be called Lothian, and they named the great river Silver Lode, for it gleamed in the morning like strands of metal. Trade flourished in these days. From the west came elven smiths, and from the east men of the hills, tall and hardy folk, who brought furs, herbs, and stories from distant lands. To the dwarves they sold timber and game, and in return received finely wrought tools and blades that never dulled. Durin welcomed them, although always with a careful eye. He trusted the stone more than the heart of men, but he bore no hatred, only caution. He would listen to their tales at the great feasting tables, his brow furrowed in thought. And when they spoke of lands far to the south, where deserts stretched under burning skies, or of kingdoms by the sea, where ships bore sails like wings, he would sit silent, as if weighing some distant future. Yet not all was well, for beneath the roots of the mountains a slow unease had begun to grow. The stone whispered more often, now cracks opened in places where none had been before. Lamps flickered without wind, and sounds came from the lowest mines, faint clangs as of chains dragged across distant floors, or the growl of something vast and unseen. The miners began to speak of it, first in hushed voices over mugs of heated ale. They named it simply Durin's Bane, though they knew not what it was, only that the deeper they went the more they felt that an oppressive heat would gather, as if the air itself grew thick and heavy. Sometimes tools would break for no reason, or veins of mithril would vanish overnight, buried beneath rock falls. None could explain. Durin heard these tales, and though he gave no sign of fear, he did not dismiss them. He summoned Na-6 and the eldest of his lawkeepers to a council in the Hall of Thrones. Beneath the crown-shaped dome of black stone, they're surrounded by the shields of his ancestors and the banners of the clans. He spoke plainly. There is something in the deeps, he said, not of our making nor of the earth's. Only it watches and it waits. We have not woken it fully, but its dreams are dark. Some urged him to seal the lower minds, others bold and eager called for it to be found and cast out, whatever it might be. But Durin said, "Only this we will not delve further, not now, let the mountains sleep." And so it was decreed all work below the 5th deep was halted, and guard were posted at the shafts that led in a shadow. Still not all obeyed. There were some greedy or fearless who crept down in secret, seeking untouched veins of mithril or ancient relics lost in the stone. One such party never returned. Their torches were found days later guttered and broken near a fault in the rock. The floor was scorched as if by fire, but no sign of the dwarfs remained after that. Even the bold grew weary. Durin grew silent in these days. He walked the halls often alone, and deep in thought he would pause before the carvings of the first fathers, or stand long before the mirror hall, where the stars were etched in silver and the ceiling shone like night. He did not sleep much, and when he did, he dreamed of flame, but still he ruled wisely. His people prospered, and the memory of fear faded into the rhythms of daily life. New generations were born, and the older ones passed into the stone, their names sung in the Hall of Songs. One day, in the late years of that age, a traveler came from the east, an old man wrapped in gray with eyes like embers behind a heavy brow. He bore a staff and spoke little, but he asked to see Durin. He called himself Tindome, a name unknown to the dwarves, though he spoke the tongue of the Khazad with rare fluency. Durin met him in the high chamber of the west spire, where the wind carried the scent of snow. The old man looked out across the mountain range and said, "You have built a realm of stone and wonder, Durin, son of the deep earth. But even stone may burn if fire is kindled in the heart of the world." Durin studied him silent. "There is something down there." The old man went on, "a relic of a war long ended, though the scars remain. Do not wake it." "I do not intend to," Durin replied. "But it is not only delving that stirs the fire. Even silence may be a burden if it lies too long." The old man smiled, though there was no mirth in it. "You are wise, that as well your line will need wisdom more." Than ever he left the next morning, and none knew where he went, but Durin remembered his words. And so the Longbeards continued their lives in pride, and in peace the halls of Khazad remained open to friend and kin. The lamps burned bright, the hammers rang loud, and below it all the silence waited. The years rolled on, and still Durin endured. His beard grew ever longer, yet no white touched at his hands. Remained strong, his voice steady among his people. Reverence grew into legend, and some whispered that he was more than a king, that he was deathless, preserved by the will of Ol, or by fate beyond the ken of dwarves. Durin dismissed such talk. "I am stone," he would say when asked, and stone endures nothing more. But even he could not deny that time passed around him like water over rock. Many of those who had come to Khazad in the early days had now returned to the earth, their tombs carved in deep chambers where their names glowed in runes of soft light. The younger generations knew Durin only as he was now, and they could scarcely imagine a time when he had walked alone beneath the stars. Khazad had become mighty, the greatest of all dwarven kingdoms. Its vaults were filled with treasure, its walls unbreakable, and its law unrivaled. The western and eastern gates were secure, its watchfires ever burning. The dwarves delved far, not only for wealth, but for knowledge, uncovering ancient secrets from the world's making. And yet, despite all its glory, there remained in Durin's heart a heaviness he could not cast off. It came upon him most often in the quiet hours when the forges were dim and the halls empty save for the flicker of the lamps. He would walk then, sometimes deep into the unused tunnels, past sealed doors and forgotten chambers, where dust lay thick upon the stone. He never went beyond the 5th deep, No one, did not openly, at least the Balrog remained nameless, its true nature unknown to the dwarves, but it had not forgotten in the blackest chasm of the mountain where not even sound could travel. It gathered strength slowly, silently. It drew heat from the heart of the earth. Its body, once wrapped in sleep, had begun to coil again. It could feel the life above the hammers and feet the voices of the children of old. It did not hate them. It did not know pity or purpose. It simply remembered. Then came a day unlike any other. It was spring in the world. Above, a message arrived from Aaron, borne by an elven herald clad in silver, and Green Durin received him in the eastern audience chamber, where the light of the morning sun spilled through tall, narrow windows. The herald bowed low and spoke the words of his lord from Sailor, Britain-bore son of Curahin, friend of the dwarves, to Duran, king of the Longbeards, greetings and tidings. Let it be known that we have wrought a thing of great power, a ring of might forged in secret to preserve all things unstained by time. We ask now that the friendship between our peoples be renewed and that your wisdom be lent to counsel. Duran listened with great care, his face unreadable. When the herald finished, he did not answer at once. He rose and turned toward the window, looking out across the land. I do not trust secrets, he said at last, not when they are made so near and spoken of so freely. What is this ring? The herald hesitated. It is not for war. It is meant to preserve beauty, to slow decay. But there are others. Duran turned sharply. Others. The herald lowered his voice. 3 among the elves, but rumors speak of more, of 9, of 7, and of 1. There was silence at length. Duran dismissed the herald with courtesy, offering him rest and food, but he did not send word to Egan. Instead, he gathered Nas 6 and the elders of his court, and told them, only this: close the gates, bar the lower tunnels. No one enters Khazad, save those we know, and no dwarf shall leave without my word. And so it was done. The friendship with Arian cooled, though no ill words were spoken. The gates were shut with politeness, but shut they remained. The dwarves turned inward, and their works grew quieter, deeper. They focused not on trade, but on craft and memory. Great tombs were hewn for the kings of old. Law halls were carved, where the deeds of the long beards were etched in gold and iron. Duran himself withdrew from public sight. More often, though, he remained ever watchful in private. He consulted his records, searching the old runes for tales of fire and shadow. He questioned the eldest law masters of his realm, those who remembered the tales of the First Age, and even the whispers of the War of Wrath. One name returned to him over and over again: Valera, the fire spirits, servants of Morgoth, demons of flame and shadow. Few had survived the Great War, and fewer still were ever seen again, but some were said to have fled into the earth, seeking refuge in the dark places of the world, and one perhaps had come to rest beneath Khazad. Duran spoke no word of this to his people. He bore the knowledge as he bore all burdens in silence, and with strength the mountain remained quiet. Years passed, and then a messenger arrived from the north. Breathless and wounded, he had crossed wild lands and climbed over the Red-Horn Pass alone. His message was simple and grim. Sawdon has risen. Duran listened and nodded, as if this too he had foreseen. He sent no warriors. Khazad would not march to war, not yet. But he ordered the forges to burn hotter and the smiths to shape arms in secret. And he sent word to the other houses of the dwarves, to the Firebeards and the broad beams in the blue mountains, to the iron fists and stiff beards in the east. The world darkens. His message: red stone must stand against fire. But Durin knew deep in his heart that fire was already rising beneath his feet in the deepening days of that age. The world beyond the mountains, stirred restlessly, Sauron had indeed risen, and though his power was not yet full, his reach was long. Rumors came south of darkness, spreading across greenwood, of strange creatures appearing in the east, and of men falling under shadow. But Khazad-dûm stood apart. Its gates were sealed, its halls self-sufficient, and its lord vigilant. Durin received the tidings of the outer world, as a mountain receives the wind, unmoved on the surface, but not unfeeling. He knew well the weight of ages, and the pattern of darkness returning. What once had fallen could rise again, and even the strongest stone was not proof. Against time and fire he called no council and declared no war, but he walked more often in the deep ways. His thoughts turned inward, his steps slow. Often he stood upon the great causeway beneath the eastern gate, looking out toward the forested valleys beyond Lothlorien. It was called now, though the dwarves used their own names for it. He would gaze for a long while, without speaking, as though measuring some hidden distance. One evening, as the lamps in the higher halls were being lit in the forges, dim for rest, Durin summoned Nausicaa. The two had been as brothers in labor and counsel since the earliest days of Khazad-dûm's founding, and Nausicaa, though aged now and gray of beard, still bore strength in his hands and wisdom in his heart. They walked together down the road of echoes, a long gallery carved with likenesses of the fathers of the 7 houses, their names etched in high runes along the walls. Their footsteps rang in the silence. "There is something I must show you," Durin said at last. He led Nausicaa down a lesser-used stair, narrow and worn, until they reached a small door of black iron sealed with a rune lock. Durin placed his hand upon it and spoke a word that Nausicaa did not know. The door opened inward with a low sigh of stone, and they entered. It was not a mine nor a vault, but a watching chamber high above the lower deeps, yet still far below the great halls. From a narrow crevice in the floor a faint warmth rose, and the walls were dark and bare. A single table stood in the center. Upon it a map of the deeps drawn in silver ink lines traced the shafts and tunnels, many now closed, others marked with runes of warning. "I had this place made many years ago," Durin said. "Before even the first tremors I felt something, then something ancient stirring far below. I do not know its name, but I know its nature." Nausicaa looked at the map. His eyes passed over familiar paths, then halted at one corner, where no name was written. "It waits still," Durin said, "and it is patient. Perhaps it will sleep another age. Perhaps not, but we must be ready." Nausicaa did not answer at once. Then he said quietly, "Why show me this now?" Durin turned to him, and for the first time in long memory there was weariness in his gaze. "Because I feel the end of something drawing near, not of my life, know that thread still holds, but of peace the world shifts, Nausicaa, and we must not be blind to it." Nausicaa bowed his head, and they stood together in silence for a time, listening to the slow breath of the mountain around them. In the days that followed, Durin ordered repairs to old fortifications, and the reinforcement of tunnel mouths long sealed. He gave no reason to his folk, and they asked none. It was enough that Durin willed it. Such was the strength of their trust in him that no order of his was ever doubted, even when no cause was given. And so Khazad-dûm endured through the gathering storms. The kingdom remained untouched, its halls bright with forged fire and song. Yet Durin's gaze turned ever more often to the past, to the early days beneath the stars, to the first halls carved near the mirror, to the voice that had stirred in his heart at the Awakening, he returned once more to the lake alone, as he had done so many times before the stars were bright and the water. Still he looked upon his reflection, and the crown of 7 stars shone once more above his head, but this time he saw other faces behind his own faces, like as yet not his solemn, noble, fierce Durin's. Yet to come, he sat upon the stone and watched the waters in silence. The wind stirred gently through the mountain passes, and he heard in it a whisper faint and distant like a memory not his own, a voice deep and ancient seemed to speak. You will not fall in flame, nor fade in shadow, you will endure, and when your line is broken it shall begin again. For stone remembers Durin bowed his head, not in sorrow, but in understanding. Whatever the future held, fire or ruin, glory or silence, it would pass, all things did, but the memory of what had been the seed he had sown would remain. He rose and turned back toward the mountain. The lamps of Khazadam still shone in the dark. The doors were closed, the forges burned, and deep beneath it all a fire waited. The seasons turned, and the years grew long. In the world beyond the misty mountains war flared, and fated kings rose and fell, and the hands of men shaped kingdoms in distant lands. But Khazad-dûm remained as it was strong, hidden, enduring. The light of its forges did not falter, nor did the will of its people. Songs were still sung in the hall of echoes, and the deep places rang with hammers and the striking of anvils. During the deathless eldest of the fathers of the dwarves yet ruled. He no longer led his miners into the dark with pick and lamp, nor did he climb the snowy heights as once he had in younger days, but his mind remained keen and his spirit unbent. To his folk he seemed as constant as the mountains themselves, untouched by time, as if the years merely passed around him rather than through him. Some among the younger dwarves began to wonder at this, not with fear, but withal they spoke in quiet voices of the blessing of Owlet, of a fate set apart from all others. None had ever seen Durin fall ill or falter. His voice had not weakened, nor had his sight dimmed. It was said he could still read the faintest inscription carved into iron, or hear the strike of a hammer in the farthest forge. But Durin himself spoke no boast of his endurance. He bore his long life as he bore his crown, with quiet dignity, and in truth his heart had begun to weigh heavy with knowledge that even stone could not hold back forever. For though Khazad-dûm remained untouched by war, the shadows beyond its gates had grown thicker. Sauron had turned his gaze north and west, and the land of Arion, once the proud ally of the dwarves, was burning. Word came to Khazad-dûm in the form of broken messages delivered by fleeing elves who had escaped the sack of Ostin-Edel. They brought tidings of betrayal and fire of rings forged with hidden purpose of treachery, disguised as gifts. Celebrimbor, the master myth and friend to Nausicaa, was dead. His body hung upon a pike before the gates of his city. Durin received the news in silence. He stood for a long while in the great western gallery, staring at the inscription above Durin's door, where the ruins of friendship had once shone so bright. Nausicaa, older now and bent with years, came to stand beside him. "I would not have believed it," he said quietly, "that such craft could be turned to evil." Durin nodded slowly. "Great skill is like fire, it warms or it burns, it depends on who wields it." Then, as the fires of war burned through, a host of orcs came against the western gate, driven by Sauron's lieutenants. They sought to plunder the halls of Khazad-dûr and claim the Mithril within, but they found the gate barred and the walls unmoving. Durin himself stood upon the battlements that day, clad in a coat of blackened mail helm, crowned with silver. The orcs came in countless numbers, filling the narrow defile between the cliffs and the sky above darkened. With smoke, yet the dwarves held firm. Arrows flew from hidden slits in the stone, stones rolled down from secret channels, and when the enemy tried to batter the gates, the ground beneath them gave way, collapsing into a pit lined with spikes and fire. Durin gave no cry of triumph, only the order to hold for 3 days. The orcs assaulted the walls, and on the 4th they fled broken, and scattered Khazad had not fallen, and the mountain stood as it always had afterward. The gate was sealed with greater craft, and new traps were laid in the surrounding cliffs. The long beards returned to their forges, but now they worked with grim resolve. They knew that they were no longer forgotten, that the eyes of the shadow had found them. Durin too changed. He was not harsher nor less wise, but there was a distance in his gaze, as if part of his thought was always elsewhere, in some deep place of memory or foresight. He no longer visited the surface, and the mirror saw him no more. Instead, he turned his time to the deep archives. He summoned scribes and rune masters, and together they recorded the full history of the long beards, their awakening, their journey south, the founding of Khazad, and the names of all who had served and fallen. I would not have her memory lost, he said. If dark days come, let the light of the past be kindled anew. And so the chronicle of the first hall was written, carved in mithril script upon great stone tablets. They were placed in the vault of kings behind 7 doors, and beneath the image of Durin himself, where even fire could not reach. Yet even as he prepared for what might come, Durin did not forget hope. He continued to teach the young, to shape tools of unmatched beauty, and to preserve the ancient songs of the dwarves. The Hall of Echoes rang often with their voices, and in the high places of Khazad there was laughter still, but far below, in a cavern, no dwarf had seen. The Balrog stirred once more, its limbs shifted like smoke, and its breath ran hot through the cracks of the earth. It felt the blood of its enemy above the children of old who had once defied Morgoth's. Well, it remembered the fury of battle and the fall of Tangordrim, and now it waited not with thought, but with hunger. Durin did not know the hour of its waking, but he felt the tremor one night as he sat alone in the chamber of stars. It was faint, a ripple like breath on still water. Yet he rose at once and placed his hand on the stone wall, and in that moment he understood the time of peace was drawing to a close. The tremor passed as swiftly as it had come, leaving no mark upon the halls, no crack in the stone. Yet Durin knew it had not been wind, nor settling rock. Something beneath the roots of the world had stirred, and though it had not risen, it had turned in its slumber. He said nothing of it to his council, the dwarfs, though hardy and bold, were not untouched by fear, and the mention of the lowest deeps was enough to bring shadow to even the brightest gathering. But Durin summoned Nausicaa once again and bid him accompany him into the oldest vaults of Khazad, to a place few remembered and fewer still had ever entered together. They descended through long-forgotten halls, through doors that had not turned on their hinges in centuries. Dust lay thick upon the floor, and the air was close and silent. These were the oldest delvings, carved in the first years after Durin beheld the stars and the Mirror. The stone here was darker, untouched by fire or time. The carvings bore no names, only symbols, the earliest sigils of the Longbeards before language had fully formed. Nausicaa held a lantern high, and the light flickered against walls that seemed to drink it in. Durin walked ahead, one hand against the rock, the other on the haft of a blackened axe that had never left his side. They passed beneath a narrow arch into a chamber Hollowed like the heart of a sea there in the center stood a single stone plinth. Upon it lay a slab of mithril unworked, and perfect its surface, smooth as still water runes encircled the base. But they were written not in Khuzdal nor in the tongue of the elves, but in a script older than either a language taught to Durin in dreams. It was said from Al himself. Durin placed both hands upon the mithril and closed his eyes. For a long time he stood thus, unmoving, as if listening. At last he spoke, and his voice was low but cleared as awake. Nosik stiffened but said nothing. Durin opened his eyes. It has not risen, but it watches now. The mountain no longer shields us. Then we should warn the others. Nosik said, the warriors, the smiths, let them be ready. Durin looked upon his old friend, and for a moment the weight of his years seemed to rest upon him. There is nothing to be done that has not been done. Already the gates are shut, the deeps are sealed. But if it comes, no axe nor wall will hold it. Nosix lowered his head. Then what hope is there? Durin touched the slab. Once more memory. That is our hope. The fire may come, it may consume the halls and scatter the stones, but the mountain will remember the stars. Will return. They said no more, and in silence they climbed again into the upper halls. In the days that followed, Durin made preparations, though he gave no sign of haste. He ordered the recording of the genealogies of all the noble houses and the forging of rune staves to be passed down through the line